Hello there, and welcome back. Now, since I've noticed recently that you all seem to enjoy listening to me talk about Greta Van Fleet quite a bit, so I thought today I'd address their biggest criticism. I'm sure any one of you out there knows that since you heard that first howl of Josh's voice, everyone immediately started comparing them to Led Zeppelin. Today, since I've been in a bit of a mood, I was listening to some of their music, why don't we address the big bad? And although I will give you that there are many similarities, I'm not going to take that as a negative by any means. And plus, we get the added benefit that since you all seem to be enjoying me talking about Greta Van Fleet quite a bit, I get to grab it and shove it down your throat. The easiest way I can boil down this discussion is in the realm of storytelling. If Tolkien's representatives had the ability to just pack up and sue anyone who decided to tell a fantasy story about some big fuck-off quest in a mystic land, based on the assumption that Tolkien invented it. No. I mean, I don't think I need to explain that there's a relatively finite amount of tropes that we kind of follow when we're telling a story, and even if many other stories in the modern age copy many of these tropes and they adapt them to their own way of telling the story, it's the small details and the interpretation of these tropes that makes a piece of work original and worth our time. It's the same fucking deal with music. It's the same thing. So, God. So even if some shared elements of music theory, even if there are some shared elements of taste and genre, it's how they do it, it's how they put it together and how they interpret it that makes it their own work. And if you like Greta Van Fleet, or the modern tastes of rock and roll, or even the older tastes of rock and roll, or fucking anything in the middle music related, and you like some of what I had to say, do consider popping us a subscription down below. Stay up to date with the memes. So, little silly extravaganza of a hello aside, what am I on about today? As we all know, since the group published their first album, and since they kind of entered, let's say, the mainstream of the modern scene of rock and roll, everyone's had their say. Everyone's pointed out that there's many similarities between them and their predecessors, and whether it be for good reason, conjecture, or someone out there just trying to be a dick, this barrage has just continued, and the release of the new music has just brought about more criticism. Now don't get me wrong, I do love me some criticism. Frankly, that's all I fucking do, innit? They do say, if you can't do, you teach. Or, well, you sit back in a comfy chair and you criticise. All this to say, really, that I'm not raising a flag and sort of a crusade in defence. I'm more just trying to point out that the criticism is all fucking bullshit, whether it be constructive or not. And that, in essence, is what we're going on about. Really? Before we dive in too deeply into our lovely discussion, if you would please grab your delicious coffee, caffeine up, if you will, and let's get going with the discussion, shall we? So how about we start things off by just acknowledging and admitting that it's human nature. Whenever we hear something new, we like to compare it to something that is known, to assess whether it's interesting, good, bad, or even more on a primal level, whether it's threatening to kill us or not. And in music, especially in 2021, considering the massive body of work that we've had for the past 50 years, something new comes out, we look for similarities, and we compare. It's just how we work. That doesn't, however, mean that anything that bears a slight resemblance to something that has been previously done is a blatant copy of it. Now, I'm not going to waste the next 20 to 30 minutes diving into the in-depth discussion as to how intellectual property law would work with regards to musicians copying each other or musicians being inspired by each other. Because if you haven't watched it, Adam Neely's video about Katy Perry's lawsuit with regards to the use of a certain phrase and motif within the minor scale really goes over this quite well, so that is it for you. If you've already watched it, or you just don't give a shit, the basic premise is there's a finite number of notes, and there's a finite, for now, number of instruments. So there's only a certain number of ways you can orchestrate your music, and musicians have been around since, well, ever. So at some point, we're bound to pretty much copy each other like dogs. So on that note, I'll do you a favour. I'll do you a solid. I'll humour you. Let's take a bit of a listen to a few tracks that I've picked out that serve up on a silver platter the often made comparison, which to be fair, I too have acknowledged, of Greta Van Fleet as opposed to Led Zeppelin. So, Fred from the future here, just coming at you for a quick moment. I would just like to put in a little preface before we get into this whole shabam that I love, and I truly love myself some Led Zeppelin. Frankly, if you've been with me for a little while, I put zero effort into hiding it. The only reason they're being brought into the discussion is because they're normally the band that Greta Van Fleet gets compared to, for obvious reasons. So, just want to put it out there. I'm just using them as an example, as I would use Cream, as I'd use the Jimi Hendrix Experience, as I'd even use the untouchable master, B.B. King. This is as objective as possible. Alright, thank you for your patience. Back to the regularly scheduled programming. And to be fair, that was pretty incriminatory evidence, in a way. You know, there's a lot of elements, both stylistic and, frankly, just purely similar elements, that one can immediately hear, and the first connection that comes to mind is Led Zeppelin. But...
How many times can Led Zeppelin copy people?
Baby, baby, I'm gonna leave you.
Oh, that's not so much.
Got that low. I done bought my ticket. I got my load. Been dazed and confused for so long, it's not true. I'm dazed and confused, just days ago.
Turns out that Led Zeppelin themselves, as high as we may hold them up on their little pedestal, were not 100% completely original either in some of their works. Is this my attempt at bashing Led Zeppelin? No. No, it is not. What I'm trying to do is show you that Greta Van Fleet is not the only band to draw inspiration from other great musicians that came before. Rather, we should contextualize both these fellas with those who came before, and those who came before them, and those who came before them, and so on and so forth. They're young kids in their 20s who are a product of listening to great music, and this translates into a musical taste which happens to take quite a bit after those who inspired them. So whenever you hear those screeching vocals by Josh, and you immediately compare them to Robert Plant, or when you hear in the new songs that have been coming out this past month and a half, the elegant strings in the background accompanied with some keys and organ playing, very reminiscent of John Paul Jones and Jimmy Page's orchestration of music as well. And if you hear those bluesy inspired riffs and you think Jimmy Page specifically, but I also think quite a bit more of Eric Clapton, although some individual small fragments of the music are very, very similar. What these kids are doing is nothing different from what Led Zeppelin and other greats have done. Recreate the music that they love and that they feel, with their own distinctive twist, ideas, and passion behind it. When I hear Greta Van Fleet, I hear the unapologetic showmanship of a Robert Plant-led Led Zeppelin, with those elegant subtones that John Paul Jones and John Bonham pop up with. I hear some of that refined rhythm basis that went on to build Eric Clapton up to be the all-around guitarist he is today. It's not exactly the same, but you can kind of hear that pocket, that start, You can sort of hear, especially from the Fires, some rhythm and chord choices that seem very reminiscent of Hendrix. And, especially now, in these new tracks from Battle at Garden's Gate, you can really start to hear some of those elements of innovation from the Black Keys. So I really hope that our little chat today has helped you contextualize and take a step back, reevaluate all these little nods and influences, and just see them for what they are. Brilliant young musicians who have digested and reinterpreted all the body of work that preceded them and inspired them, and come up with their own pretty cool project. Not that much different from what everyone else did in the past. And although I am the last person on the planet who can walk around trying to say stop raving needlessly about pointless shit, I hope at least we were a bit productive about it today. So, thank you very much for tuning in. I hope you found these observations insightful, interesting, or if you already thought everything that I said in the first place, hopefully I managed to put it to words for you. And yeah, thank you very much. Now, for anyone new here, do keep in mind that I am very excited about the new release, and hopefully in about a month's time, shit, it's already a month away, when the full album releases, you will be sure that I will be giving my 2 cents on it. So if you like what I had to say today, do consider subscribing down below. That's it. I'm fucking off.